Possession and exorcisms are more than just theatrics played out on the silver screen. We thank you for joining us for part two, where we're going to discuss the faith, both real and what we consider fake, as well as the science behind this very real mental health diagnosis. Grab your thinking caps, party people, and get ready for some possible enlightenment, renewal of faith, or science that you may have been searching for.
Woe to you, O earth and sea, for the devil sends the beast with wrath, because he knows the time is short. Let him who hath understanding reckon the number of the beast, for it is a human number. Its number is 666.
Is this evil? If this evil is rooted, all or part, in incest, I break that curse. Come here. The blood between you and me. Pick up the guys. That's right.
You think you're gonna take me out? He couldn't take me out. He won't even listen. No, hurt him. Hurt him. Are you afraid, Bob?
Quit! Do you have legal authority, yes or no? Do you have legal authority? Do you have legal authority? Yes or no? Yes or no? Of course.
Of course, Bob.
What is the legal authority? The incest? Is it the incest? I'll take that for yes. How many generations? It didn't just start with the mother. How many generations? How many? How many? With the number, I command you by Christ. How many? Clearly, how many? How many? It clearly How many? I command an answer. I take the sword of the Spirit. I want a clear answer. How many generations? How many? 85. 85?
85!
So I insist.
I
Incest.
The first official guidelines established by the Catholic Church came about in 1614, when most households contained a grimoire, which is a book of spells or a book of magic, if you prefer. Just like pit bulls or firearms on their own, they're not evil, but with malicious intent are very dangerous. By the 1960s, exorcisms were seldom performed in the States due to the beginning or emergence of a psychiatric understanding and treatment advances in mental health practices. So we started to see a more scientific approach coming. It wasn't so much faith based as it had become scientific. Midway through the 1970s, saw an increase of requests for relief of demonic possession. Consequently, this came after the Christmas premiere of William Peter Blately's The Exorcist hit the theaters. So it was very planned. Hey, party people. So real quick, we're doing our episode on possession and exorcisms, the scientific and faith based side. And so Lavender and I was actually just through the second page of my show notes, and our video started acting up, and our audio started acting up. Uh, she couldn't see me for a minute. She couldn't hear me, but I could see her moving around perfectly. And then she was talking, and I couldn't hear her. It literally was like it wasn't like she was frozen. It was just like she was kind of um, she was just stuck, like stuck in a reel of time.
Yeah, pretty creepy. And it
It
happened on
was
the last episode too with the possession. We were having issues recording similar, kept kicking us off and stuff.
hmm so
FBI doesn't want this out, guys. The FBI does not want this out.
that I'm actually thinking it's a little bit more of a stronger entity. I think it's the Catholic Church.
You think that a Catholic church has control over the internet?
Oh, yes. The Vatican has erased several podcasts, several videos. They have gotten rid of a lot of evidence that what they're doing is not only unethical, but it is dangerous and it is criminal. So you're damn right, I believe that.
Fucking Catholics.
Give me a name, demon! Ancient serpents, depart from the servant of God! Tell me your 6 names! We are the ones who dwell within. And I am Lucifer, the devil in the flesh.
I don't see them going anymore.
Mm-mm. It's timed, so then when they have movement, they'll go off again for like 30 seconds.
Oh, okay. Now I know what to look for. But Universal Studios planned a Christmas premiere because they wanted shock and awe. And if anybody's seen that movie, major shock and awe. Especially because of what it was in the time period it came out. Catholic priests, parishioners, and official exorcists became empowered in this ancient ritual, armed with holy water, religious items, which included a Saint Benedict's medal inscribed with Vade Retro Santanus, which is Latin for Step Back Satan, and a book of prayers. Due to such a high demand for this holy ritual, rogue priests existing in the fringes of the church took full advantage of this need and began performing unsanctioned underground exorcisms for a minimal fee, of course.
Of
So,
course.
this time period was crazy for our nation because women could not legally have abortions. So, if they found themselves unwed and pregnant, or they found themselves a victim of a sexual assault and pregnant, they couldn't go to a doctor, just a general. They couldn't go to a hospital. They had to go to these back alley abortionists and
Right.
risk their lives. So the same thing was going on with exorcisms. People found themselves frightened and believing they were under demonic possession would put themselves in harm's way to get relief. In January 1999, took a look at the traditional rite of exorcism and revised it. So the church, the Vatican, actually, keeping the original Latin version as an option, begins seeing the possessed individual as still having free will, even with a demon having control over their physical body. This makes no sense to me because it suggests that possessed people are not only allowing, but choosing to be in the grips of a demonic infestation.
Right.
So, just for a moment, think how much fear an individual would experience speaking in a foreign language or in tongues, aversion to holy items that originally brought them comfort, or committing blasphemy and or sacrilege. So we're taught, when we are indoctrinated into religion, we are taught there are certain acts, there are certain relics, there are certain things that you take very seriously and you just don't do. And hell is laid out in front of you as this horrific place of endless torture. So if you take the Lord's name in vain, you're going to hell. If you don't say your prayers, you're going to hell.
Hell. Hello, hell.
Exactly. So, in your mind, thinking about someone in this kind of situation that is very faithful to their religion, how would you what would be your opinion about kind of what they would be going through, what they'd be feeling?
I mean, I don't believe in heaven or hell, so it's hard for me to kind of relate to that, but I like so but if I thought about it and I can imagine like something that I'm terrified of being trapped in my body
Hmm.
with me. It would be a constant state of fear.
Yes, exactly, exactly. Um, and then think about it: your original avenue of relief, which would be your church, your priest. You can't go to them because they're telling you that they no longer deal with this, that there's so much more that goes into it, and you don't get relief. So you're desperate enough to go into a back alleyway, pay some guy telling you he's an exorcist, any amount of money that he's asking for relief that is never going to come. Here's where I feel there is a contradiction And a superiority complex demonstrated by the Catholic Church. Satan and demons are discussed in all other Christian based faiths. So I imagine any person from any or no religious background for that matter can find themselves in a crisis of faith or under attack from demonic forces. But it's the position of the Roman Catholic Church that although demonic activity is happening in other denominations, it's absurd and dangerous for a non Catholic to attempt an exorcism.
How is it possible that heaven, hell, demons, fallen angels are discussed in every, and I do mean every, Christian based religion, but it is not a part of their theology? It's bullshit to me. It's bullshit. How can you teach about something they believe is there, that exists, but they can't drive it out?
Those priests, though, fuck those guys.
We're going to get into that. So we're going to go ahead and start our episode again. Let's see what other spooky shit happens. This time I'm going to keep rolling.
I don't understand why they think they should be the only ones. But a priest I actually spoke to on the phone stated, quote, God respects the authority of churches operating under the name of Jesus Christ. However, we have a protocol and we do a lot of discernment. He went on to say that, put simply, they are worse off than a Catholic inflicted with demonic activity because they don't know what to do, because the rites of exorcism is not even a part of their theology. As well, he stated, quote, there's a danger in assuming that many manifestations that look otherworldly are not. I think in our tradition, we clearly involve social services, experts in medicine, and religious folks who are trained to discern carefully and most judicially whether or not something demonic is going on in someone's life. End quote. This statement led me to so many questions.
I know, like, prehistoric cultures, they have found records of them using tools to essentially drill little holes in the skulls of people that they thought were possessed. And this was their form of exorcism. And this is like Egyptian and early Chinese culture. So, even before the Catholic Church. So it's very weird to me that the Catholic Church thinks that they're the only ones who deal with this problem.
It's a superiority complex. And it's funny because how he said that they involve all these different services. As we go through, you'll hear what these services are and how they use them. And I can hear a lot of you guys calling bullshit right along with me. First, in the Bible, Luke 8:26 through 39 discusses how Jesus Christ cast out a legion of demons from a man into a pig, who was then sent into the ocean. And Matthew 8:16 states, quote, when evening came, many who were demon-possessed were brought to him, and he drove out the spirits with a word and healed the sick. So that right there, doesn't this suggest other religions, as long as they worship Christ, have exorcism in their theology?
Yeah.
Um, and secondly, the trained exorcist went on to say, quote, "We do common minor exorcisms with a deliverance prayer a lot, but the solemn rite of exorcism that you see in movies, the one everyone is hung up on, is used sparingly and only as a last resort." So, why can we watch the solemn rite of exorcism in a movie, but a Baptist minister can't perform an exorcism?
Right. Right.
Here's something.
That doesn't make sense.
No, it does not. Here's something to ponder, party people. Since the archdiocese can teach their people the rite of exorcism, why can't they do a class or a program to introduce this area of spirituality to other religious leaders, introducing it into their theology? If they do a series of prayers before they actually do the solemn rite of exorcism, why can they not teach this? Teach these prayers. Give them a direction to go to help their parishioners.
I mean, I feel like that's the one you hear about the most.
Because you can't tell me Catholic people are the only ones that are uh, uh, afflicted with demonic infestations.
That doesn't necessarily mean that it's not happening in other religions. It's just the one that's mainstream, I guess.
Mhm. Um, this is something very interesting. I think you guys will like. Through my research, I've discovered how possession manifests itself in other belief systems. Shamans from different cultures utilize religious practices that connect them with the world of spirits through altered states of consciousness, like a trance, to bring spirits or spiritual energies into the physical world for exorcisms and healings. Monks. I watched a documentary on monks in Thailand that once a person has been afflicted with a demonic spirit, they release that spirit from the person and then they use the nail and hammer technique, which is a very old tattooing. It is very painful and it is very respected. And they put a talisman to protect them from demonic infestation again. They tattoo it onto their backs or their chests. And this is the person's physical body aligning with their spiritual body to be able to never have that kind of um, possession or experience or affliction again.
Interesting.
Those who practice Wicca may allow themselves to be possessed by the goddess, also known as Mother Earth, so that she may relay messages to her faithful. Um, I do my belief system is more on a paganistic level, because I do not believe in heaven or hell or any of that. But I also don't believe that a Wicca priestess can just randomly call up our goddesses. Um, that's a whole nother subject we'll get into. But if this is, this is what they practice within their belief system, then, you know, I absolutely respect it, but I don't believe it.
Right.
As we transition into the mental health side of possession, keep in mind most anthropologists have noted that women are mostly the possessed and join spirit cults to involve themselves in forbidden topics, once dominated by men. I. M. Lewis, Alice Cahoe, and Dottie Galletti, they're all anthropologists. Their research suggests that poverty and diets lacking in thiamine, calcium, vitamin D, and niacin is that women that are deficient in these minerals, as well as pregnancy, the strain of pregnancy or lactation, it exacerbates the symptoms that may make them believe that they are spirit possessed. They stated in their research paper that, quote, the involuntary symptoms of these deficiencies affecting their nervous systems have been institutionalized as spirit possessed. My question is, why is this only happening in Afro Eurasian women in third world countries? Why is this only in Vatican ran behavior hospitals and not happening in the Western cultures? So these missionary based um, anthropologists went out and just decided that these people that are not practicing Western based Christian um, religions are possessed because they're deficient, they're impoverished, so they're deficient in healthy foods.
Okay.
And they only treat spirit possessions in Catholic based behavior hospitals. That shit doesn't fly in the United States because there's something going on in these hospitals that the Vatican and the Archdiocese do not want the public to know. And it is because they are a hotbed of physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. These women are being locked up, they're being used for slave labor, then they're being then they're
Right.
being beaten, then they're being raped, and it's all because they're possessed.
Or they're being told they're
They're
possessed.
being told they are because they're acting a little bit different than their ancestors did. Now, guys, we're not attacking the Catholic religion. Please don't think that we are. We are curious travelers in this world. We are seekers of truth. Um, we just want to ask the hard questions and we want the answers.
Yep.
Blind faith is a killer. It is as dangerous as any drug, any serial killer, any poison, because eventually it gets into your mind, it gets into your body, and it will end you. The Archdiocese former exorcist, Father Gary Thomas, has taken the stance on demonic possession as a pseudo diagnosis. The church's stance is real demonic possession is rare, but when the demand for exorcism can be contributed to the increase in violence and drug use, their viewpoint is that most people only need prayer, the laying of hands, or a medical person's assistance. and there is no diagnosis recognized by the DSM-5. This is their stance. They're saying that because our world is becoming increasingly violent, our world is becoming there are less and less people that are turning to God and are turning away from God and looking for scientific, realistic, holistic answers to their spiritual needs. That this is why so many people are having, the delusion that they're possessed.
Okay.
But there is a diagnosis. There is a recognizable diagnosis, and we're going to get into it. Clinical psychiatry says the dissociative behaviors are identified as a temporary loss of the sense of personal identity. The church relies on faith based practitioners. The DSM 5 helps us to understand that individuals exhibiting possession like symptoms may be or should be evaluated by a psychological team for illnesses such as catatonia, mania, bipolar, Tourette syndrome. Lav, you want to kind of give us an idea, give our friends out there an idea of what Tourette's is? Because I know a lot of people think it's just spewing of profanity, but it's actually more. There's more to it.
Um, it's it's like a misfiring in the brain, which causes people to say say things, but it also causes them, it's more like intrusive thoughts, and it's not always negative, but they'll have visions and these intrusive thoughts, and a lot of times that is what there is coming out of their mouth, is these misfiring of the brain. So it could be old memories, it could be things they saw on TV. It's there's no really rhyme or reason. I don't think anybody really knows where these images and stuff are coming from, because they're not hallucinations. It's just split seconds. It's just tiny pieces of things that just, and some people it's rapid fire constantly. Some people it may only happen if they're triggered, or if they're anxious
Exactly.
or something. There's triggers to it, or there's the more like higher risk people for it, that it just kind of happens more regularly to
And
them.
it can even be something like a word that, because I discovered during a lot of my schooling and stuff that people who have Tourette syndrome, they also have very advanced OCD, so they can get obsessed with a word or an action phrase, and that could be what's like Lav said, when you have the misfire, that may be what's coming out, is this obsession. Um, and then medically they suggest, things like epilepsy. Um, so they're saying basically every person that comes to them uh, that is demonstrating possession type behaviors, it means they have dissociative identity disorder, or they have epilepsy, or they have Tourette's. But the thing is that DID, dissociative disorder, is extremely rare, even now in the 21st century. So before, it was a phenomena that just very, very rarely happened. A DID is described as a central person with alters. The alters' behaviors are what give the appearance of demonic possession.
Well, and with
DID, that's not a that's not like a genetic um that's not a genetic mental thing that happens. Like a lot of, like schizophrenia and stuff is all
Mhm.
genetic, but DID is purely trauma based.
That's where I was going. Thank you. Please elaborate on that.
It's so these people end up with DID because of trauma. So it's their brain and it's specifically childhood trauma. I'm sure there's probably some um, people that have adult trauma, but that end up with it. But it's more specifically child-based traumas, and it's their mind in this developmental stage that is suffering from this repeated trauma on them. So it is creating a false identity, a different world for them to go to in their head to protect themselves from
Hmm.
this trauma. A lot of them won't even remember the trauma because they will go into this other personality, this other person that they have created in their head, and that's their safe space. And then and then if they're getting the trauma in that personality, their brain will just keep creating new personalities to protect them. And it's so DID is primarily like childhood trauma, like repeated
And
trauma.
severe trauma. This is not
Hmm.
a disorder that develops simply because, and please don't take this as we are um downplaying the severity of these types of abuses, but it doesn't develop in someone who was maybe molested a couple of times, or maybe daddy was a little heavy handed with the belt, or mom didn't always cook food 3 4 days in a row.
And it's never. I don't think I've ever heard of like people that are like neglect cases. It's usually like physical and sexual
And it's
traumas.
severe.
I don't even think like emotional trauma. People develop it from emotional trauma, but it's like the abuse that they are withstanding is close to death, being beaten. It's like that
It would
severe.
be in my experience, it could develop from somebody that maybe was a victim of sex trafficking, and their parent or parents or caregiver was the one that, air quotes, pimped them out. Or, like Lav said, they beat them within an inch of their life to where they probably clinically may have died to be revived just to be beaten again. It's not it's and the altars are there so that the central person can check out. I had a
Hmm.
psychiatrist explain this to me one time, and I thought it was one of the best explanations. Is he said in a DID case, the central person basically kind of goes into a room, a closet. They go to sleep, and
They have no memory of anything that has happened when they are in these
no,
other personalities. The other personalities may remember if they're swapping between alternate personalities, because a lot of people with DID have more than
yeah,
one
yeah.
personality. So if they're swapping between alternate personalities, they will remember what happened in the other personalities when it happened. But the main personality, the central person, will not remember any of it until they come back into themselves. And it's just like they woke
And
up.
that's something else to be very mindful of, is they may know they may know the altars, but to them, this is there, it's not them. These altars are friends or relatives that deal with the shit they don't want to deal with. So even though physically it's
Hmm.
still them, emotionally and mentally it's not. It's either a stronger person, it's a smarter person.
A meaner person.
Yeah. I know there's a lot of people that will go back to a younger version of
Hmm.
themselves that was happy and happy times, and they will be that 5-year-old that was
Yes.
happy, and it's them, but at a younger age when it was good times in their
Yes.
life.
Thank you for
That
saying
too.
that, because yeah, that's perfect. That's absolutely perfectly put. Recently, a subdiagnosis known as possession syndrome has become a hot topic and is being studied in relation to other major diagnoses. This complex phenomenon piggybacks disorders where altered conscious and unusual behaviors are already present. But in possession syndrome disorder, either the afflicted or the support entourage will identify as an animal spirit, a deceased individual, and at times a deity, either good or bad. For other purposes, we will use those who identify an altar as a demon. So, 40% of patients diagnosed with possession syndrome are reported to be women. This number may actually be higher due to a high number of people who seek out religious figures for help and not professional intervention. Individuals who demonstrate hypochondria, somatic hallucinations. This is for you guys, this is where things are happening inside their body or outside to their body, but it's nothing visible. Um, they may scratch in a alter state, and then when the central person comes back, they see the scratching. They believe it was done by a demonic force. Um, they will have internal stimuli. Um, they have olfactory hallucinations. This is where your reports of smelling roses, smelling decompensation, smelling sulfur comes into play. And a deep depression is reported in a higher amount of possession syndrome symptoms. Sadly, most as well describe this event happening during a crisis of faith. So these were people who turned to their churches, turned to their religious leaders, turned to their spiritual um, escapes, and had a trauma that was centralized around it. Many of these patients report extreme, extensive, and ritualistic childhood sexual abuse, especially at the hands of clergy. Do you want to speak on that, Lau, for a second?
The dirty priests.
And it's not only priests.
I mean, that's just
It's people in power, like they're doing things to children, and it's funny because it's usually
Mhm.
boys that they are doing things to, and it's a power move. It's basically to put them in submission and show authority and power over them. They're just breaking them down because, and I mean, in my opinion, it's because that they see potential and that they fear what this person is going to achieve, what this when they grow up, what they could
Mhm.
achieve, and they are just simply trying to break them down. It's a power move. It has nothing to do with sex or lust or
Rape,
anything like
rape
that.
never
It's
does. Um, and
it's
and
just power.
sadly, doing this research, I came across a documentary that talked about nuns. And the nuns, some of the older nuns would sexually assault like the newer novices that were coming in to create a fear in them that no matter what they were told to do, they didn't question, because there was this power that these older women had. There was also a couple of reports. Not a lot of people talked about it, but there were a couple of people who talked about being in sexual relationships with the uh, nuns that were part of their educational system. So they went to Catholic schools, and a lot of these young girls, especially budding into puberty, were groomed and ritualistically sexually abused by these nuns.
Which is the same.
It's just a different gender.
The patients experience higher amounts of disassociation events, which include internal auditory hallucinations, feeling as if they are under mind control from an external being. Research explores the possibility that these delusions are the reconstruction of the traumatic experiences the patient endured. I can see that.
Right. I can too.
Young boy that was, active in the church, all of a sudden is terrified of priests in their cloaks, nuns in their habits. Of course, that's going to be
Yep.
your trigger. An aversion to religious symbols or practices could be decontextualized memories of the abuse. Uh, while both are also symptoms of DID and schizophrenia, clinicians are tasked with making the clear distinction of possession syndrome versus other symptoms. So, take a walk with me, guys. Let's take a look at diagnosed possession syndrome symptoms and patient demographics. So, the top three identifiable themes include: A, links between religion, trauma, and psychopathy, like we just said. B, a developed aversion to religious artifacts and religious figures, which create delusional thoughts and responses to these experiences, like we just said. And C, family or support system refuses to utilize psychiatric or medical treatment, instead, seeks out religious interventions, including exorcisms. This is where the idea of possession can be developed as a way of different cultural experiences, explaining behaviors that are present, accompanied by heavy religious overtones. So these are your old grandmas who have raised your parents in the Catholic Church. You've gone to catechism and you suffered extreme ritualistic abuse. And when you start to crack, when the cracks in your psyche start to show, instead of your parents understanding the possibility may be a mental health issue, it's a crisis of faith, it's a crisis of religion.
Religious professionals have reported that patients contributing their afflictions to demonic possession utilize religious interventions as a way to feel acceptance
And develop a false sense of community belonging. I can understand this because dealing with mental illness, no matter how much support or services is received, is a lonely, scary battle. Um, I will put it out there. I've spoke about this before. I am a suicide survivor. I did attempt, and thankfully was not successful. And although I have a very strong support system and a very strong, loving acceptance of my different mental illnesses that I deal with, it is a very lonely battle to wake up and feel like you are an absolute burden to everybody and everything, and that your life means nothing. So to get around other
Right.
people that have survived their attempts and have felt the same way, there is a sense of community there. It's like finding your tribe and they understand you.
Right.
Clinicians have begun research into the pathioplasty, defined as variability in the specific manifestations of possession syndrome being shaped by their cultural surroundings. So basically, what clinicians are starting to find is that the symptoms are defined by the patient's culture. So if you grew up in a culture where medicine men are used in place of doctors or psychiatrists, then this is where your delusions are going to come from. Your specific symptoms of possession are gonna show. So it's not gonna be the same for every person.
Right.
Examples of this being patients that identify with certain religions will report their delusions influenced by that religion's views, such as Protestants report satanic symbols and cult like experiences. Catholic patients report delusions soaked in guilt over sin, and Muslims report delusions surrounding loss of religious practices and symbolism. Muslim patients, this fascinated me, not in a morbid way, but it fascinated me because this is a group of heavily symbolic worshipers. They pray on a rug, they pray at a certain time, they pray a certain way, and they do it over and over and over from the moment they can, that they're taught and they can grasp it and perform it till their last moments. And even in their last moments, there's still heavy symbolism. So taken out
Right.
of that cultural saturation, for example, say Muslims who move to the United States, where, yes, we do have a wonderfully wide variety of religions and practices and places that you can do that. There is also the differences. You have women that are not completely covered. They don't wear their hijabs. Um, you have some Muslim women that are here that practice, but again, they're not covered from head to toe. And that may cause a crisis of faith in somebody that may already suffering from mental illness, can create possession like symptoms. Satanic panic.
Right.
The diagnosis of possession syndrome, regardless of cultural practices, are: one, religious practices, i.e., prayer, sin, possession. Two, relating to the presence of God, Jesus, Satan, being a prophet, or Allah. And three, references to mystic practices or exposure to black magic, supernatural beings, sorcery, or practices of the occult. Um, I Lav, when you were younger, um, in a more naive state of mind, did you did you ever play with, say, a Ouija board, tarot cards, casting spells, just silly things you really didn't understand and weren't actual true
Yeah.
practices.
Yeah, all the time. We used to go. I remember one time we set my uncle Scott's bathroom on fire with the Ouija board.
I got to hear this.
We were just in the bathroom playing with the Ouija board, and we had the lights off, so we had candles all around us going. We were having a séance. We were probably, I don't know, 11.
That's my girl. That's my
And
girl.
and and we nothing happened. It was lame, but we left the candles
Oh,
going.
shit. It happens.
But yeah, we used to. I was obsessed with Oh, what do they call them? The bones, where you throw the
Oh,
bones, and depending on
yes,
how the
yes,
bones
yes,
lay.
yes. Tea leaves, the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
However, it could be done with crystals, it could be done with rocks. So it's whatever.
Can't
It's
remember what
whatever.
that's
I
called.
can't off the top of my head. I know it's a fortune telling practice.
Yeah.
But shit, you could go to Spencer's or Hot Topic and buy these damn things, and the next thing you know, you're telling
Right.
your bestie their future. Um, but in cases of people who are of delicate mind, who are of delicate spirit, as far as having these different mental illnesses that they're or mental challenges that they're dealing with, these simple things that we did naively could truly cause somebody to believe that they have become a vessel for a demonic entity and and truly completely alter their life. Conventional therapy practitioners are encouraged to explore a pseudo religious approach to treatment utilizing faith based assessments and ideals the patient may identify with. Um, in nursing, I learned that a lot of times when you're dealing with a patient that has dementia or Alzheimer's, when they slip into that place in their life where you are maybe their sister, their cousin, their husband, their children, who mothers, fathers, that sometimes it's more detrimental to correct them in the middle of a delusion or a hallucination than it is to just go along with it. Because in reality, you're not going to cure their dementia or their Alzheimer's by constantly telling them, just throw a name out there, hey, Betty, I'm not your sister. Margaret, she's dead. She's been dead 30 years because you can actually trigger them to relive whatever trauma it was. And sometimes you can solve the trauma by being that person and giving them what they're seeking. And I actually saw this one time in a rehab hospital. We had a male CNA that this patient truly believed was her son. And her son had left home one day. She hadn't spoken to him again in years. And
Wow.
every time he would go into the room, she would, call him by her son's name. She would beg for his forgiveness. She would ask him to come home, come and see her more regularly. And he constantly would be like, I mean, not this rude, but like basically, lady, I'm not your kid. And when one of our newer doctors came in, he said, try talking to her as her son and offer her forgiveness. Because this poor woman would not eat, she wouldn't sleep, there'd be hours of crying because she Yeah, because she
Oh,
lost her son. So he did. He went in one time and she was, telling him, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to do this. And he got down, and it was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. He got down, he took her tiny hands in his monstrous, mittens, and he said, Mama, I forgive you. That was the past, and I love you, and we won't worry about that anymore. Her health increased dramatically overnight. So what they're saying
wow.
is that maybe psychiatrists should explore that avenue. If a patient's coming to you telling you that they're possessed and they're demonstrating these type of symptoms, why not discuss it with them? Why not try to find them that reason? You may just simply say a prayer with them and take them out of that crisis. What's the harm?
Right.
With last year's renewal of cinematic interest in demonic and spirit possession movies, it's not a wonder that there is a rise in reports of demonic infestations. Nearly half, if not more, of the world's population believes it's possible to be possessed by Satan. But just like violence, you can't blame every affliction on television and movies. With that said, there must be the crucial differences made between a general assumption of what we believe is going on in the world around us versus the world inside of us. It can become a thin line between the two when the possibility of the second coming of Christ, the possibility of the birth of the Antichrist, and what God expects from his followers saturate religious doctrine. How many times? You work in DC now, right? Right.
No. Well, Maryland. I'm
Okay.
like,
But
yeah,
you've
close to
you've been
DC.
to DC, you've gone, and I know for me, I've seen it in Sacramento, San Francisco, Los Angeles. You have the sidewalk prophets. They're standing there with their signs that say Jesus is coming. They talk to you through bullhorns and microphones. They tell you that if you don't repent, that that Jesus is coming for his people, everybody else will be left behind, and you're fucked
Right. Right.
all
I
the
mean, I see
time.
that all the time.
And some of these people, yes, are suffering through a mental disorder. A lot of them aren't. A lot of them are just religious zealots that want to push their agenda. Along with possession syndrome, delusional thinking and religious indoctrination can lead to mass hysteria, known as mass psychogenic illness. Examples of this are, say, a contaminant released in the environment, COVID 19, that led to a majority of individuals that showed symptoms. For those who did not understand or believe what was happening, they grouped together in their shared delusions. And this also goes for the Salem witch trials. This also goes for when the government was teaching people to fight the commies. Um, and this
Mm.
also goes into when people started constantly talking about the second coming of Christ and that a child would be born with the earth number cycle of 666, the mark of the beast.
I wonder if the dancing plague
Mhm. Same
is
thing.
the same.
Same thing. Mass hysteria. Satanic panic. Satanic panic was huge in the 80s. It kind of died off a little in the 90s. and a little bit in the 2000s, but we're starting to see it rise again because you're having people that openly practice alternative religions are coming forward and saying, yeah, you know what? I'm not going to hide in my basement. This is what I do. This is what I do. And you need to be okay with it because I'm not hurting anybody. So we're starting to see
Right.
mass hysteria again. Famously, Annalisa Michaels' case demonstrates mass psychogenic behavior. And this is why. Raised devout Catholic, at 16 began demonstrating behaviors suggesting epilepsy and schizophrenia, such as convulsions, blackouts, trance like states, along with visual and auditory hallucinations. Her parents turned away from the diagnosis of frontal lobe epilepsy and Geschwind syndrome. So, this disorder causes hyper religious beliefs and feelings, and turn to the church for help. Annalisa's condition began to deteriorate beyond the limitations of her medication. This led to Annalisa believing and behaving as if she were possessed. With the permission of their local bishop, she underwent 67 exorcisms. They performed all of them in secret. Throughout the 10 months of exorcisms, bones in her legs and tendons were broken from continuous hours of praying on her knees. She expressed the desire to die to atone for all the wayward youths and for the apostle priests of their modern churches. Because her family and religious leaders were affected by this psychogenic illness, Annalisa would die at 23 from malnutrition and dehydration. The two priests and her parents were charged with negligent homicide. What's important to me is how much the Catholic Church states they use medical and psychiatric doctors to evaluate their subjects. But when faced with both a medical and psychological diagnosis, they ignored the findings and went against the recommendations of these professionals. That baby was sick. She was sick. And because of how saturated her life was by the behaviors and beliefs of her family, she would lose her life. She started out on these medications and was doing very well enough to go to college. But you know, Lav, because I'm sure you've seen this, I've seen it. Medication in serious psychiatric disorders can only hold you for so long. Your body gets used to it, your body becomes immune, and sometimes
Well, and it just takes one time of missing the medication, and a lot of psychiatric medication. It it numbs your brain, so it numbs everything. It's not as complex as just being able to numb that
right.
specific area that's not working properly. It numbs your whole pain. It numbs your whole brain, and then you'll hear people complaining about that they don't like the way it makes them feel. It makes them feel like they're not themselves, and
You're
that's and it
zombified.
is.
You're zombified.
And that
And
exactly.
I have seen, I have worked with people that have been on their psychiatric meds for so long that they don't want to feel so dead inside anymore. They don't want to go through the motions of life. So they
Mhm.
go off of them thinking, well, I'm fine now. And then everything comes back. Also, too, I've seen patients as they grew in age and in different hormonal changes. Their medications don't hold them anymore, and they need a whole different regimen. And
Mhm. Yeah, that does happen because your brain is constantly
Mhm.
changing and healing. And I was just having this discussion about addiction actually, and it's real similar. Like addiction um overwhelms your brain with endorphins, so your brain stops creating the endorphins. Well, I don't know the terminology, but it stops creating the endorphins process in the brain because you're putting the
Mhm.
endorphins in there with the drugs. And so that's when you stop using the drugs, your brain is no longer producing them. So that's what the addiction is. You
Right.
need that chemical, and it takes time for your brain to realize, "Hey, I'm not getting overloaded with this anymore. Now I have to repair myself and change myself because I
Yeah.
cut off the endorphins." And so that's the same with these sort of medicines. Like it's altering the chemistry in your brain, and then your brain is now changing itself because of these other chemicals. So if you stop them, your brain is no longer the same as it
No.
was before you
And
started them.
unfortunately, with a lot of psychiatric diagnoses, your body organically stops making these same hormones and endorphins that Lav was talking about. You no longer can naturally produce serotonin. You can no longer naturally produce the ability to control the cortisol in your that gets you, your fight, flight, or freeze. You can no longer create healthy neurological pathways. So you because
Right.
unfortunately, like a machine, sometimes your brain throws a cog and it just can't. It can't function. It is common for people with psychiatric disorders to experience a loss of agency where their thoughts and actions not only seem foreign to themselves, but to those around them. This is especially concerning in a person with no prior diagnosis, was not particularly religious, or even had preconceived notions of possession. Psychiatric diagnosis should not be the only avenue explored when a person has this loss of agency. It's important to look for medical explanations for hallucinations or foreign behaviors. Here's a couple of cases where the patient claimed they were possessed, but were relieved of these fears with medical treatment. First is a woman who suffering from encephalitis, also known as brain inflammation. So your brain swells and starts to push against your cranium, against your skull, due to a bout of COVID, pleaded with her religious leader, asking there must be a way to get it out. And she constantly talked about this pressure, this presence in her head. She could not think for herself. She could not act for herself. They were able to place a shunt. They were able to get the fluid off her brain. They were able to, with advanced and very strong antibiotics, were able to reduce the swelling in her brain. And no longer were there any signs of possession or belief possession.
Hmm.
A second patient
Interesting.
born with a structural abnormality of the basal ganglia, whose job is to execute the functions of motor control, as well. At the time, he was reporting possession like symptoms. Also had a decrease of blood flow to his temporal lobe, along, once again, like with Annalisa Michael, suggest strong associations to subjects admittingly having possession experiences who wholly connected to neurological and biological sources, and less being truly possessed. So, what happened is because this poor guy's motor functions were impaired due to a brain uh, deformity, he couldn't control his body. He would have certain movements that were completely involuntary. He didn't know when they were coming and he didn't know what they would do. And then at the same time, because of that abnormality, he had a loss of brain blood flow, excuse me, to the front part of his brain where we conceive all of our thoughts and our memories and our actions and reactions. Despite every religious service he sought out, it took and I say it small because it truly was. It it just took a little kind of drill to the head. They were able to remove the part that was deformed and to reconnect certain parts of his brain. And although he never did 1,000% live a completely unafflicted life, he no longer felt he was possessed.
Interesting. Well, I mean, like that's what I said about the like ancient Egyptians and
Yeah.
Chinese.
Yeah.
They did the same sort of thing.
Despite an overall decline in believers of demonic possession, reports of demonic infestation and possession are on the rise. From an unbiased scientific point of view, it's important to consider the explanations from medical, psychological, and faith based areas. The dichotomy of real versus delusional, and scientific versus faith healing is an essential discussion to find the best course of action for an afflicted individual. Because regardless of personal beliefs and ideals, an intervention is warranted for those suffering, but salvation comes at a price. It took the tragic death of Annalisa for bishops to ban exorcisms to this day in Germany. In a 2008 Poland, the Catholic Church built an exorcism center. 10 years later, had an estimated 150 priests practicing there. But instead of doing battle with the forces of darkness, they were fighting the demons of homosexuality, along with exercising individuals leading esoteric lifestyles. People who did not live by these religious ideas, these leaders, because they didn't live the pious life that their archdiocese felt they should. They just started exercising people and condemning them to a life of just absolute servitude and shame. And I know some very religious people who are also very gay. So just because you have a lifestyle that is not within somebody else's idea of normal, you don't have to give up your spiritual beliefs. So we're
I
not
agree with that.
saying so the positive spiritualists will embrace you because they don't give a fuck who you're in the bedroom with. Unless it's a child, of course. That should go without saying though. Laura Sherbert of Pleasant Glade, Texas, suffered PTSD along with carpet burns, cuts, and bruises when at 17 the members of the young woman's former church, Pleasant Glade Assembly of God, held her down for several hours, exercising her for abandoning their hyper spiritualistic environment. For these and numerous other accounts, their fees were paid with a pound of flesh.
Hmm.
So simply because
Sounds
Laura
about
didn't
right.
want to be a part of their faith healing, taking up serpents, they decided to beat the shit out of her, exorcising her demons. I tell you what, if I was her mama, I'd have showed up at that church with my two uncles, Smith and Wesson.
All
A
right.
less intrusive, but no less dangerous intervention has a high price tag. Self proclaimed Dr. Vincent Bacchus started a quote, personal one on one deliverance ministry, exorcism, and inner healing session in person and via Zoom. Bacchus has over 19 years and 20,000 deliverance exorcisms, is endorsed by pastors, priests, medical doctors, and prominent individuals throughout the USA and London. And I sure hope you guys are picking up on the sarcasm in my voice. The good doctor is also a professed healer who has healed the deaf, the lame, the sick, and oppressed due to his status as a greatly anointed expert in such traumas of the occult, rejection, witchcraft, barrenness, as well as verbal, emotional, and sexual abuse. He can also relieve an individual who is experiencing dissociative identity disorder, schizophrenia, multi personality, which is the same as DID. So, why he listed it twice is, shows his ignorance, in my opinion. Bipolar, depression, and OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. Now, if you want to be a healer and deliverance minister for Bacchus, he employs a few devout followers to teach you how to expel demons. But the bottom line is, how much does all of this cost? To have a daily blessing on all streaming platforms is only $19.95 an episode. For an exorcism, a quote fixed donation of $349 is respectively required, or a deliverance prayer of at least $175 to cover overhead costs. So, and this is all on his website. Now, here's the fun part. I contacted the ministry, and you all can as well. We'll include in the show notes the telephone number, but I'll give it to you here now, and we'll put it in the show notes. Like I said, it's 888 202 9516. My questions went unanswered, and ultimately, the conversation was ended when I simply asked, what if the person seeking help does not have such a large amount of money? Wouldn't a true man of God heal that person anyway? So every question I threw at this fellow exorciser, he would find a way to twist it and basically not answer it, but to kind of ask it in a. So he'd basically parrot me. If I said, hey, how do you make the lame walk? Well, you're asking, how do we make the lame walk? Yes. How do you do that? Oh, that's what you're asking. Fucking said it twice, dude. Yes. My quest for understanding ended at the doorstep of Father Gary Thomas. A quick background on Father Thomas. He was once lead exorcist for the Stockton Diocese for 15 years, had served in San Jose as a priest and exorcist for 37 years. Father Thomas is now a teacher in the San Francisco area, educating young men embarking on their spiritual vocation to be priests. He's quoted as saying, I help create an environment that embodies intellectual, pastoral, spiritual, and emotional components that lead them to answer their calling to Christian discipleship. He sounded like such an honorable, angelic man. So I jumped through the hoops and did all the things to get the bishop of the San Jose Diocese and the bishop of the Stockton Diocese to okay an interview. So we tried for weeks to get this man on the podcast. This episode originally was supposed to be an interview with this man. And when I was finally able to speak to him via telephone, he said, quote, the solemn rite of exorcism is never discussed outside the church. They are too sacred, end quote. Disappointed, I went for my own informational search. And guess what I found? On the website beliefnet.com, Father Thomas was interviewed by Wesley Baines in an article titled, quote, Interview with an Exorcist. And he was greatly compensated. He states in the interview that he's disappointed many people who feel he has answers on how to help their dilemmas. Quote, they think they've got the answer to their dilemmas, and they don't. I get lots of requests for exorcism, and I say I don't do them on command. End quote.